I'm Christina Wren with History Buff at the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles, California. Today is a screening of the new documentary No Asylum, which follows the untold story of the pleas for asylum by the Anne Frank family before World War II, and how many countries, including the United States, refused to accept them as refugees. We were able to sit down with Eva Schloss, the stepsister of Anne Frank, who has since written books about her experiences during and after the war.
Well, Eva, how did you first meet Anne?
I was 11 years old, and one day a little girl came to me, introduced herself, and her name was Anne Frank. Daily, actually, we saw each other and played with each other like 11, 12-year-old kids do, you know, it's a time.
Being so young, you know, at what point did you realize that things were changing within the community?
Well, in May 1940, the German army invaded already. Anne's older sister Margot and my brother Heinz got a call-up notice to be deported to Germany to work in factories. And that was really when I realized it was a matter of life and death.
Anne Frank's father, your stepfather, tirelessly wrote letters to many countries requesting asylum for his family.
Was this something that later in life he ever spoke about?
No, never. Never really heard about it, that he was trying to get to America.
Otto Frank's letters requesting asylum were lost in the archives for over 70 years before filmmaker Paula Fouce was given access to the documents.
How did this story first come to you?
I have a dear friend, Robert Perry, and he knows Jonathan Brent, who's the director of the Evo Archives in New York. It's founded by Sigmund Freud and Albert Einstein. And I was given a stack of pamphlets, and I went through them all, and I saw this one, the Otto Frank file, and I found out that Anne Frank's family had been struggling to get out of Europe and save themselves during the Holocaust. And this entire chain of letters, chain of documents of their struggle to try to save themselves was all preserved.
What was it like for you first reading these things and kind of experiencing what, on an individual level, someone was going through just to try to help their family survive?
I was very surprised to find out that the Frank family had gone through that they, as refugees, were trying to get asylum in any country they could. They were desperate. And they are indicative of millions and millions of people at that time.
The letters are so heartbreaking. The one bit in particular where Otto is saying, essentially, our lives don't matter, but for the children.
It's our children. We want them to grow up in freedom. And then everyone ended up dying in the Frank family except for Otto.
Anne Frank and many others were not granted asylum and were often deliberately given obstacles to slow and even deny their applications for asylum in many countries, including the United States.
People today are surprised when they hear that, you know, the U.S. was not opening its doors to Jews during the Holocaust. Does that surprise you that people aren't aware of that?
It is not something which the American government advertised, that they are not. Now, of course, with quite different communication, one knows much more what is going on in the world.
Do you think the reaction would have been different if people would have known?
I don't think so, because at that time in the 40s, America was quite anti-Semitic.
The prejudices and fear facing the Jews during World War II have many similarities to the current Syrian refugee crisis and the experiences of many other refugees around the world.
When people say today that, you know, comparing the refugee crisis to the Holocaust isn't fair, that's not accurate, what would you say to them?
Well, it's a different situation, but it is nevertheless, for those people, for those refugees, it is a life-threatening situation. They have nowhere to live because their house is bombed or things like that. They have no way of earning a living. They have nowhere to get their children to school.
Fear, I think, is what often causes us to behave in ways towards each other that aren't humane. How do we address those fears and remind each other in a time where there are crises and there are things to be afraid of?
In general, we don't have to be afraid. And if we treat those people how they should be treated, like human beings, and not put them in camps and treat them like animals, they will be grateful and will make good citizens in their new country.
This is very current, unfortunately. So, to educate ourselves about what happened and to use Anne Frank and her family's example of how they were turned away is important.
Through learning from history, the mistakes are not being remade. But we have learned from history and we still make the same mistakes.
You can follow the film at noasylumfilm.com. I'm Christina Wren for HistoryBuff.